Juul has sort of, gotten to prominence primarily because of sort of this regulatory gray area that existed. In order for Juul to survive, do you think it's actually capable of sort of, closing that sort of regulatory loophole to its benefit and not sort of, getting itself caught up in the process?
Well, Juul is kind of between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, the biggest commercial threat to Juul is the proliferation of copycat devices which sell the consumables, and this is the main profit, is selling the nicotine pods over and over at a lower price. So they would like to create very complicated regulations. They'd like to have standards of purity and good manufacturing that would be beyond the financial ability of the many startups in the vaping segment. On the other hand, Juul has a challenge because it has triggered, through its marketing and through its product attributes, an epidemic of nicotine addiction amongst American high school kids, with about 5 million high school kids using Juul within the last 30 days, which has created great concern in Congress as well as within the administration, with President Trump, with Melania at his side, announcing very recently that they want to ban flavored electronic cigarettes. So Juul is concerned if they go forward to the FDA, even if all of their application is very well done, as no doubt it will be, that because they have been principally responsible for a huge upsurge in youth nicotine addiction in America, as a public health measure, they could be denied and taken off the market.
It's interesting, your description of that model, because it obviously sounds like razor blades and Gillette. It sounds like Hewlett-Packard and printer ink. But I guess the difference is that with those companies, if there is a substandard substitute on the market, it doesn't create this massive health scare that regulators need to get involved in.
Well, let's remember that Juul itself is creating significant health concern about addicting kids and the effects of vaping. Now, more and more, we're seeing not only acute illnesses, but we very much concern about the effects of vaping over 20 or 30 years. I mean, if you start smoking as a teenager, you're not going to get emphysema or lung cancer till you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s. It's many years downstream. You know, these knockoff devices, some of them are true counterfeits. They say Juul on them. They act as though they are Juul. There are others that may violate Juul's patents. So, for example, there's a proprietary linkage of the pod to the device and other attributes. But many others of them simply are competitors. And I think Juul is trying very hard to suppress competition in the marketplace because they have such a dominant market share and because their valuation until recently was nearly $40 billion. Well, that may be less now, but all young people and even adult smokers are very price sensitive. And so if a pack of Marlboros in America is $8, a Juul pod that delivers the same nicotine to the user's bloodstream as a pack of 20 Marlboros is $4. Well, many of these knockoffs or similar type small vaping devices do the same for $2 or $2.50. So children, teenagers have limited discretionary income, and they're going to downtrade to cheaper brands. And that's what we're seeing.
Already we're seeing perhaps some of the knock-on effects to the business of Juul. We understand that they're going to be restructuring in terms of staff. The pressure is clearly mounting. From your perspective, is there anything that could eventually take them off the market from a health perspective? If Juul is blaming the counterfeits, and yes, nicotine addiction is something that is very worrying, but they could still play out the case that it helps people cut out cigarettes, if nothing else, more positive than that. But is there any real negative, harmful effect of a Juul apart from the nicotine addiction?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the acute effects seem to be predominantly oil-based extracts of THC and CBD, which are from marijuana. But the CDC has not yet come out with the comprehensive results of its investigation, and it does appear that nicotine vapor products do have some acute risk of serious lung injury. That could be, but any such regulation should be category-wide. What we are beginning to see, however, is bursting of the youth fascination with Juul. You know, it's one thing if you tell a teenager, you know, if you vape 30 or 40 years from now, you might get sick. They don't care. But if you hear, my gosh, if I vape, I might die next week, it gets their attention. So Juul is starting to become uncool. And the one thing we know about teen fads, they're never long lasting, and you can't count on them as a business model forever. And the number of adults that are using Juul, while it is probably substantial, it seems to me that most of the market has been this viral fad amongst the youth of America buying enormous numbers of the devices and the pods.